would you offer our opening prayer today, please?
Sure.
Thanks so much.
Our dear Heavenly Father, we're very thankful for American Heritage School and for the opportunity we have to learn history with thy plan and thy hand involved in the events that have happened. Please help us to have thy spirit and that Mr. Gentile may feel inspired as he teaches us. And we say this in the name of Jesus Christ. Amen.
Amen. Thank you very much for that prayer. Well, let's take a look here. Just I have a class schedule that I typed up. It goes all the way from today through our class on January 4th after the break. So this should keep us set then for those couple weeks. So let's look here. Today, tennis court oath, and then we'll do Declaration abolishing the feudal system as well as the civil constitution of the clergy. There's some questions for you. And then if you'd like, of course, you're always free to do a word study for homework that we're going to do about passion because it'll relate to Alma 3812 as we look at some lessons from the French Revolution. And if you go into the View section of the Revolution, open the Revolution folder, and then you can click on that document to open it up and see what it entails. This Wednesday, we'll be talking about those two documents that I mentioned. And then, to prepare for our class on January 4th, you can read the Declaration of the Rights of Man, and there's some questions for you. Of course, we'll have a Christmas break. We won't have any classes or tutorials during the weeks of December 21st through the 25th or December 28th through January 1st. And so then our next class after our classes this week will be on Monday, the 4th of January. Okay? So there's that, and that'll, of course, be on there for you. And then we can go to today's PowerPoint then. Okie dokie. So today we're talking about the tennis court oath. This is the oath as it was reported in the Gazette Nationale in 1789. This is a newspaper, and so hopefully you've been able to at least take a peek at it. It's pretty short, really about just a page long, maybe not even a page. This will take us through the first phase, what you could call, of the French Revolution from May through parts of August 1789. Welcome, Lori. How are you today?
I'm good, thank you. Sorry I'm late.
Oh, no, that's okay. Well, great. Well, let's start then talking about a case study. This case study looks at declaring independence in America, not in France, in 1776. This document will probably look familiar to you. As you read this paragraph here from the Declaration of Independence, I'd like you to try to reason some principles of the American Revolution. And let's just talk about some of those. Maybe let's point to specific words or phrases and try to understand the principles of the American Revolution before then we compare those to what we'll see in the French Revolution.
Do you just want us to jump in?
Please.
Just a summary of the reasons, I guess, is what you're looking for?
Sure, yeah. Basically, the principles that you see that are explained in this second paragraph from the Declaration of Independence, and you might say that these are principles behind America's Revolution.
Well, all the Lockean ideas are there, and for me, the focus being on that government is supposed to protect our life, liberty, and property, and since it's not, we have a right to we have a duty to institute a new form of government.
Yeah, great. Thank you so much for that. So we have a social contract the government's not fulfilling. It's the purpose of its creation, which was to protect natural rights such as life, liberty, and property, and therefore, after seeking redress and finding none, we have this opportunity, this right of revolution that Locke talks about. Excellent. Thanks, Wendy, for that. What else do we see here? What was the American Revolution about? What principles were behind it?
Well, the one that's missing from the French Revolution is the idea of God. Sorry to interrupt. Go ahead.
No, I was just going to say that the idea that a man or a woman, an individual, is a sovereign entity and that they are accountable to their creator is something that is probably kind of radical for
Mm-hmm.
the time when there's so much, there wasn't slavery, but people were kind of considered property. And I mean, in England, they are subjects to a king, even
Mm-hmm.
though in England they did have many rights
Mm-hmm.
afforded them. This is kind of a radical, the individual is a sovereign, completely sovereign individual, and that the government is simply there to ensure that that sovereignty is not infringed upon.
Yeah, great. It's a great way to put it, Lori. Thanks so much for that. Let's see. Do we see anything else in here? And welcome, Brad.
Well, can you hear me? Sorry, I had this on mute for a
Yes.
minute. Okay, I am noticing the just powers from the consent of the governed.
Mm-hmm.
That the powers that do govern you must be just, and that they have to have our consent in order for them to make those rules in the first place.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Excellent. Thanks so much for that, Heidi. Great. Let's see. Anything else that you'd like to point out here? Principles behind America's Revolution. We've got lots of great ones.
Well, just the one pointed out at the end that when your rights are infringed upon, that you have the right to kind of defend them and rebuild the government, so to speak. So to throw off a government that's not working and to find one that will.
Yeah. Great. Thank you so much for that. Okay. And welcome, Walter. How are you today?
Good.
Oh, good. Well, let's then take this case study and all those wonderful principles that you mentioned, and let's relate them. How did Americans apply the principles stated in the Declaration of Independence between 1764 and 1791? See what kind of a list we can create as a class, a list that would explain the key events in this application process.
Are you talking about things like the Boston Tea Party?
Mm-hmm. Sure.
Where they said, hey, we weren't represented in this, you're not governing us justly, and we didn't consent to it in the first place, so we're not going to abide by it.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, great. So we have this patriot protest. Excellent. What else happened between 1764 and 1791?
Well, first they endured a lot of things that they thought were unendurable, the Sugar Act, the Stamp Act, the Quartering Act. And it started this long process of petitioning and trying to make do. And as you showed us in that section, at first the idea was to try to get representatives in Parliament, and eventually that evolved to something completely different.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, definitely. Thanks so much for that, Wendy. Let's see, and so how, we've talked about some of the principles behind the revolution. Then we know that the Americans endured for some years, that there were some protests, and then what ended up happening? Just if you were to explain the American Revolution as you understand it. And of course, we've just come from talking about it, so hopefully you'll have a few things, to help you in this narration. But I'm curious because understanding this sequence of events will really help us to understand this first phase of the French Revolution as well.
I would
Also
say
something about after the war, basically they were able to successfully throw off the government, so to speak, declare themselves independent. And then we talked about the Articles of Confederation being a draft to the Constitution, and all that was a process of trying to discover what kind of government they needed to do the things that they said they wanted in the Declaration of Independence, that is, have protection, have their rights, so forth.
Yeah, excellent, right? I mean, if we look at the Declaration as a promise, the promise of America, then we could see the Constitution as the fulfillment of that promise. Excellent, to protect those rights for which the Americans had fought so well. Thank you for that. What else? Was someone else jumping in there?
Yeah, I would just like to say that the Americans organized themselves in many ways in their different communities. There wasn't a king. There wasn't some leader. It was like this grassroots movement. They organized themselves. they created things like the Sons of Liberty, where they would get together and meet and discuss the things that were going on, and is it good, is it bad, what can we do? And so they were very proactive, and they really took this new government, it just was so grassroots, and they took it all very seriously, I think.
Yeah. Yeah, thanks so much for that explanation of local action, which is so important to the success of the American Revolution. Well, of course, you've mentioned so many great things, and, there's lots that happened, during these years. We go from different forms of protest. We have pamphlets. We have actions like, the Tea Party, burning of the Gaspé, Boston Massacre, all these different events and flashpoints. We have coercive acts. Then we have the creation of the unification of the colonies through First Continental Congress, which led to a second, which led to the Declaration of Independence. They start writing an Articles of Confederation. We have this long war. Finally, we have the Articles, and then we have the Constitution at the end. 1791. Does anyone know why I chose that date rather than, say, 1787 or 88?
Rights ratified.
Yeah, so the Bill of Rights ratified, right? So we see this sort of fulfillment of, trying to protect these rights for which it was fought. So in this application of principles, we see all sorts of things going on. And so now what I want to do, as we keep this explication in mind then, let's compare and contrast. As we study the first phase of the French Revolution, I'd like us to try to look for ways to compare and contrast that phase's principles and the French people's applications of those principles with the principles of the American Revolution and Americans' applications of those principles, especially between 1776 and its Declaration of Independence and 1787 and its Constitution. And you might be surprised by the similarities. And I think that could be perhaps something to keep in mind as we talk about what we do today. So then let's look here at this Estates General. By the time that it met on the 5th of May in 1789, France had changed. It was clear that this deep and broad-reaching change was very widespread throughout French society. And so by the time that the deputies, or the representatives, to this king-called temporary legislature that he was going to consult in the Estates General met here in Versailles in one of the great halls of the palace complex that was created there by Louis XIV. By the time they met, life was very different than it had been before, and we'll look at some of those differences and sort of the character of the people and the principles for which, they tried to stand at this stage of the revolution. Well, as we look, it's very interesting to study this Estates General. The Third Estate, right from the beginning, said, we're not going to conduct any business with the other orders, until the king says that we can sit in a single legislative body, not by orders in separate chambers, right? Because this would be the revolutionary shift that they wanted to achieve in legislative sovereignty in France, from a vote by order, where every time you could have the two upper classes outvote 95% of the people because it was a 2-to-1 possibility, to a vote by population, which is exactly what Sayed had called for in what we discussed last class, which is this pamphlet, What is the Third Estate? And so if we start looking at this first phase, what are some principles that you can reason about it?
They wanted representation.
Mm-hmm. Excellent. Representation. Also, what else would you say? How would you characterize it?
Well, this is kind of like the phase where they were asking to have their own representatives in Parliament before they realized that wouldn't work.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, excellent. That's a great connection, Wendy. And so, just judging by your answer, talking about representation, talking about the ways that we're represented, it's clear, and it needs to be remembered, this part of the French Revolution is not the terror with guillotine and 40,000 dead and blood in the streets, etc., that people usually remember about the French Revolution. This is a phase that is perhaps very similar to a phase that we're very familiar with in the American Revolution. Well, as the Third Estate is making its demands, because they said, hey, we're 95% of the people, we can make demands of everybody else in this new age that we're trying to bring about, there's a stalemate, and it goes all the way until the 10th of June. This was from May 5th, 1789. Finally, on the 10th of June, this is an incredibly important date to the French in their history, The third estate proclaimed that it was going to move forward with or without the other two estates. It did send letters of invitation saying, hey, come with us to this new venture, but if you don't, we're going to move ahead anyway because we have the sovereignty. We speak for France, not you. And so they had this process of verifying credentials, as they called it. And really, it was a roll call. It was saying, hey, where are you from? You're a deputy. Let's see your credentials to make sure that you're officially representing the people, that you have their consent to be here as you should. And this was this first procedural step necessary to start the legislative process. And so, I mean, as they saw themselves, by representing 95% of the nation, they felt that the nation had given them the right and the duty to take control of the government, given this opportunity. And so we start to see this transfer of power in French society officially beginning. So once again, then, let's ask ourselves the question, what principles do we see in this first phase?
Sovereignty of the people.
Yeah, excellent. Thank you for that, Brad. Sovereignty of the people, right? This is the Lockean revolution, if you will, right? This is they're saying, let's go through the steps. We believe that we are sovereign, that we give consent, that we have the right to control government, that it shouldn't control us like it has been for hundreds and hundreds of years. We finally have an opportunity now that the tides are turning, that popular appeal is at a place where it hasn't been in the past, so let's see what we can do, trying to apply all of these great political philosophies of the Glorious Revolution, the American Revolution. I mean, they took their cues from these two events that had happened within the past 100 years. The Glorious in 1688 and 9, and then the American Revolution, I mean, just 10 years before. Well, between the 12th of June and the 17th of June, they had this roll call of deputies. It took a long time, and they were also waiting to see how much support they could get from the other two classes. The second estate, or the nobility, they refused to join, but they did start to enter into discussions of possibly joining the third estate in the future, but they definitely stayed out of it. The clergy, however, were much more sympathetic, and so members of the clergy started trickling in. First it was 3, and then it was 4 and 5 and 6, and then it started to sort of really gush forward to where we have many members of this first estate, decided to join the third estate for the roll call. Well, by June 17th, the roll call is done. They have whoever's going to go with them, and they march forward as what they call the National Assembly, a new legislative body for the people. And this National Assembly, believing itself to be the true sovereign power in France, because, of course, it spoke for the overwhelming majority of the people and had been elected by them, they claimed supreme authority in the state. And this is really interesting to see what they do, because not only do they say we should be sovereign, but if you think about the original purpose of the Estates General, which was just to be a body that would be consulted by the king in reform measures, well, now they've taken that and they have just changed the rules of the game because they start provisionally authorizing taxes. They start guaranteeing the national debt. They start making other legislative, official, quasi-official, if you will, moves that show the king who's boss in this new society. It's interesting, though, even as they did that, and this is so similar to the American Revolution, because if you remember, they would say, we might be forced to separate, but we don't want to. We want rights within the empire. As the deputies in France made all these sweeping changes in the National Assembly, they shouted, "Vive le roi!" Long live or live the king. And it was clear, though, that even though they were paying him lip service, that the king was no longer sovereign in France. And so my question to you then is, if we relate, how would you compare and contrast the National Assembly's creation and actions with America's Declaration of Independence and the Articles of Confederation?
Well, I would say that it was only created as a last-ditch effort. That they tried everything else first, and none of those things worked. And so, in both cases, they had to do something else since they weren't being listened to.
Mm-hmm.
I think it was. I think they raised their flag to the nations by doing that, just like the Americans did. They raised their flag to the nations and to proclaim their sovereignty and their authority to act for and in behalf of their nation.
Yeah, thanks for that, Brad. What else do we see here?
Well, like the American Revolution, they set up a form of government to start themselves off, which probably isn't doesn't have enough details to to work.
Right.
Just like the Articles of Confederation it gave them a lot of duties but not a lot of power to resolve those. But unlike this part of the American Revolution phase, I don't think anyone was saying long live the king at this point.
Right. Yeah, definitely. Definitely. So if we think of by 1776, they were saying, down with the king. The king is no longer our father. We cut the last symbolic tie to empire, and we're on our own. The long train of abuses and usurpations, et cetera, to tell the candid world, about George III. And so this is definitely different in that sense. Thanks so much for pointing that out, Wendy. Well, here's a picture then of Louis XVI, the king who lost power to the people of France. Keep that image in mind. You'll see him again. If we look at his reaction, this is very, very interesting. And just try to put yourself in his shoes. I mean, for hundreds and hundreds of years, we have the rule of French kings. And for the last couple hundred years, we have just absolutism, in just its most extreme forms. Perhaps no more evident than in Louis XIV. I mean, they're meeting in Versailles, which was his creation, this sprawling, this magnificent, extravagant show of royal power, rule by will, the divine right of kings. And so he's from this tradition, and now we have tides changing. He's so shocked by what's going on, these tides of popular change, and this loss of sovereignty, at least in the eyes of the people, that he just really tries to turn back the clock. And it's so interesting because suddenly, on June 18th, he tries to reassert his authority by calling a royal session of the Estates General, which would be for the 23rd of June. And in this session, he said that he was going to declare his own program of reform. And so, this is important to the document that you read, he locked out the National Assembly from its meeting place in the Great Hall of Versailles, which you saw in that picture at the beginning. And so they come then on June 20th to meet, for business as usual in the National Assembly, and they find closed doors, locked doors. They are outraged, of course, by the king's attempt to thwart their efforts, and so this is why they reassemble then at a local indoor tennis court. That's why they got there. And so I want to take a look at the famous sketch. This is Jacques-Louis David. Ask yourself these questions. Let's try to reason as we look at it. What do you see? What could it mean? What does it teach you about the memory of the tennis court oath? And what does it teach you about the first phase of the French Revolution? So here's the picture, Jacques-Louis David, the sketch of the tennis court oath. What do you see?
Well, I remember when Caden made the comment at the very beginning of this section of the French Revolution, saying how much this reminded him of Patrick Henry's speech. And I don't know if he realized what this was even of at the time, but as I was reading about this and read in the history book also that you gave me, Mr. Gentile, I thought, boy, that was really applicable, because it kind of was, where the people decided to gather and said, we're not going to listen to royalty anymore, and we're going to do what we have to do. And I thought, I don't know if you realized how applicable that was.
Yeah. Thanks so much for pointing that out and for connecting it to Caden's great comment.
Yeah, and also that they met in a church. Patrick Henry and that legislature met in a church because they'd been kicked out of, what was it, Williamsburg, the capital there. Anyway, this is a similar thing, being locked out of the National Assembly.
Yeah, excellent.
Of the State General, sorry.
Great connections there. Who are these men at the fore? Who are they? Who do you think?
I'm guessing the First Estate and the Third Estate, but I don't know.
Yeah, that's right. We have this symbolic member here of the First Estate, this clergy, right, who's joined with them in this National Assembly, and we also have members. Remember the Third Estate, which is so diverse. The butcher, the baker, the candlestick maker, everybody from wealthy merchant down to a beggar, and so we have these other members of this estate, coming together in this show of brotherhood, right? Fraternité, right? This brotherhood of the French. Okay, and what else is going on here? What do you see?
Well, just the how many people you see there, just in the windows and in the back. I think it's a good depiction of. You asked, how is the tennis court oath remembered, and probably remembered as something that everybody was behind and hopeful about. Just the majority of the people, this was their beginning, the beginning of their freedom.
Yeah, definitely. And I love how you brought out that symbolism. You know, David is showing masses of people. You can't even see them in the back. They're just little tiny, squiggles, but yet they represent the masses of the French for whom the National Assembly believed it spoke. And which is so interesting. We have people here, looks like they might, almost falling out of the windows to see them. It's this momentous event. Of course, right, the French, they want history to remember this act as when the people really expressed their own sovereignty, and so they show it as such. I mean, all the details of, the common man, even down here too. If you look in the corner, we have a tennis racket and little, tennis balls or whatever they used at that point. Excellent. Well, let's continue on then with these things in mind. And you've read a primary source. It was this newspaper report of the tennis court oath. And so, Reason, then, tell me from your reading, what do the deputies say in this piece about Louis XVI's plans?
His plans are what he actually had already done, like locking them out with armed men.
Yeah, locking them out, and you could also say also future plans as well, which are tied to those. And if you look in the second paragraph, that might be helpful.
Well, in the future, I suppose they were worried about the intrigue and determination with which the king is pushed to disastrous measures.
Yeah, definitely, right? Because, they saw this sign, and rightly so, as the symbol of a potential coup d'etat of the king trying to take power back from the people. And truly, he did, because he would try to disband the National Assembly and just put everything to a screeching halt and then try to move forward as if nothing had happened. Of course, it won't happen, and we'll see what happens, but that's exactly what their fear was, and so thanks so much. He also, the reporter here also talks about how, there are, let's see, how strange it is that the hall of the Estates General should be occupied by armed men, and those armed men are the royal forces of the king. And so by force now, he's trying to renege on his promise of giving the people a taste of sovereignty. He's trying to take back this absolute power, this divine right, as he saw it. Well, if we continue to look then, okay, what promise then do the deputies make as a reaction to Louis XVI's attempts to reassert his sovereignty?
Never to separate until there's a constitution established.
Excellent, right? Never to separate. We will not disband, right? We will continue to work together. We're not going to let this opportunity pass. And so if we think about this then and relate this, how does this promise relate to the American Revolution's principles and Americans' applications of those principles between 76 and 87?
You mean as far as them saying we pledge our lives, fortune, and sacred honor kind of a thing?
Sure. Yeah, definitely. And why would they do that? What was it for?
They were fixed in their determination to make things different.
Yeah, and specifically, right, not only just to fight a war, but, right, through asserting their independence, because, this may be a small thing, but the Americans saw it as the war of American independence, not the war for American independence. They fully believed in Locke's theory that they had the right to revolution, that it was their consent that made good on the promises of the social contract, and so when King George III did not live up to his end, that they were able to then take their end of the bargain and change their own creation to form a new government. And so they believed that they were already independent as they needed to be, that they were totally legitimate once they declared independence. And so it was a war of independence to keep it, not to gain it at the end of the war, as some people perhaps wrongly think. And then, of course, the end result of this is a new government, right? Not just so we can be free and then run around without law, but freedom, right, with order. And so we see this republic that they try to create. And we see the Articles of Confederation as the blueprint, and then a Constitution as the fulfillment. And the French, looking at the example of the Americans, said, yeah, we're going to do the same thing. We're not going to disband. We're going to keep fighting, either figuratively or literally, until we have a constitution of our own to make us a new sovereign nation. Well, if we look at this then, I like to think of this scripture because I think this is an important one for us. How would you relate it to what's going on at the tennis courtos? And ye shall be hated of all men for my name's sake, but he that endureth to the end shall be saved. Matthew 10:22.
Well, the part for my name's sake has to do with liberty. They weren't really using God's name, but unknowingly, every time anyone seeks for liberty, they're talking about the Spirit of Christ, and typically anyone trying to get liberty from a government is hated of their government and persecuted severely.
Definitely, that's a great point, Wendy. What about this enduring part of the scripture?
Well, I know when it takes on an endeavor like recreating or creating a new government, there's a long road ahead of them, so to speak. And so when we look at the American Revolution and how they had to endure a lot of different things, but that they persevered, and that, it turned out being in their favor. And I think at the beginning here, that's what they were trying to do in the tennis court, was try to say we're going to endure to the end because we want to come out victorious.
Yeah, thanks so much for that. And, I've been struck recently by just how much of life enduring to the end is. I guess I'm fairly young, and so I'm recently, from being in the stage of, go on a mission, and you get married in the temple, and then, start having a family, et cetera, all these things to sort of look forward to, and now I'm more on the stage of, hey, live the gospel every day. And, there's not perhaps as much that, you see as perhaps milestones to achieve, but now you need to make the most and enjoy the journey each day and find the riches around you each day. And really, this is the hardest stage in the American Revolution, when we have 8 years of war, and we'll see the French, are in for a decade of chaos, as they try to endure, and as we see, they're just not able to do it. But keep that in mind. As we look at the ultimate goal then of the deputies, Wendy hit it right on the head, creating this Constitution. If we look then at the goals of America's founders, why do you think, and if we even skip over here, why was creating a Constitution so important to the deputies?
Can I ask a question?
Sure.
I'm not sure why you're using the word deputies. It's kind of confusing me.
Yeah, they called themselves deputies. They're just representatives.
The Third Estate did?
Basically anyone who was elected to the Estates General was called a deputy. It's just the word that the French used for a representative to the Estates General.
Okay.
Yeah, that's a great question, Heidi. Thanks for asking it.
And one of my answers would be that you've got to have a written constitution in order for the rule of law to reign instead of the rule of man.
Excellent. And what is it about having something written down, legally binding? Why is that important? I mean, I think we perhaps take it for granted, but what's the big deal? I mean, think of, the English and the Bill of Rights and what a big deal that was for them. Why not just say the rights are implied, right? We had the anti-federalist, federalist debates. The Federalists are saying, oh, no, those rights are implied, we don't need a separate Bill of Rights. The anti-federalists are saying, no, we need them. Why? Why is it so important to have it written down, legalized?
Because that's where you can go for redress. If your rights are infringed upon, you can't, if it's not in writing, if there's not something that is concrete there, then it's just, there's just no teeth to it.
Excellent. Thanks so much, Lori, for that. If we think then about the importance of the Constitution, why is it important to us today? And, perhaps in your answers, let's try to look at Doctrine and Covenants 98:5-6, and that law of the land which is constitutional, supporting that principle of freedom in maintaining rights and privileges, belongs to all mankind and is justifiable before me. Therefore, I, the Lord, justify you. and your brethren of my church in befriending that law which is the constitutional law of the land.
I asked myself a question last week. The question I asked myself is, do all people deserve freedom?
Mm-hmm.
And it says right here, it says that these rights and privileges belong to all mankind. But then I thought about, what if someone's not self-governed? Or what if a nation votes in socialism? Does that same freedom belong to them? And I think that it does, but they have to prepare themselves first to have it. Just a thought. I thought it was interesting.
Yeah, thanks for that, Caden. I do appreciate it. Any other comments?
You know, I
have a
think
question.
Go ahead.
Go ahead, Brad.
I was just going to say, you know what? The Constitution served the people just like the brass plate served Lehi and his family. When years go by, you have to know you have to know the founding principles that got you there, so you don't lose your social way.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Thanks for that, Brad. Wendy?
I wonder, well, I just legitimately wondering whether in a celestial kingdom, whether there's actually a written constitution, whether such a thing is necessary,
Mm-hmm.
and it may even be necessary there, although I'm not sure, but it most certainly is necessary everywhere else.
Yeah. That's a great point, a great question. I wonder, will we be so righteous that, a constitution, if you will, of celestial living is just written upon the fleshy tables of our hearts, or is it somewhere else, in the books,
Right.
so we can be judged out of them? I don't know. It's a great question. Well, if we continue then, after this tennis court oath, it's interesting to see what happens, because this is just such a turning point. It's this pivot point in history for them on which, the long gate, think of the farm gate, swings. Following the tennis court oath, members of the Second Estate nobles, they start to join the assembly. And by the time of Louis XVI's royal session, the assembly was more united than ever before. And so this really was a momentous occasion for France. The 23rd of June, the royal session comes, and in it, Louis tries to reassert his authority, but in doing so, he ends up losing all legitimacy and credibility with the French people. It's very interesting to see what he says. First, he rejects the resolutions of the 10th of June and the 17th. He decrees that orders must remain separated and under his authority, so no vote by head. We have this, once again, the 1-1-1 voting among the classes. He threatened that if he did not receive cooperation, he would just cease consulting the Estates General and press on with its own reforms. He ordered that the unified assembly disband and that it reconvene only in its respective orders. And so we start to think about these reactions. How would you compare or contrast them to George III and his reactions during the American Revolution?
Well, didn't he basically say, if they're not going to do what I tell them to, then I'm going to go in and force them to do it?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, right. So we see force. It's so interesting. We have agency on one hand. Oh, go ahead, Brad.
I was just going to say it's a shadow. It's a total likeness. One is like the other.
Mm-hmm.
I've being the age that I am, and I've seen that same. When people give themselves to force and coercion, and that's the order in which they are used to governing things. I think it's the order after Lucifer, because it's similar no matter what language you're speaking.
Mm-hmm.
And it's as well followed today as it was 1,000 years ago or 5,000 years ago.
Yeah, excellent, right? I mean, there's the promise of a good result, but it's done through force, right, rather than agency. Go to Moses 4, we see the same thing playing out between Satan and Christ and the two different plans. There's, of course, the Assembly's reaction to the royal session then. complete defiance. In defiance of the king's orders, the National Assembly voted to reaffirm the tennis court oath and the Assembly's legislative measures, and they just continue their deliberations as if nothing had happened. More nobles and conservative clergy joined the Assembly at this point because they really have just written off Louis XVI. He tried to call in troops to quell the revolution, but he saw that the tide of popular opinion was against him. And there's this famous quote where Louis is just, he's sitting in his drawing room. He's confused as to what's going on, how things could have slipped so far, so quickly, and he asks one of his courtmen, he says, wait, so is it a revolt then? And the man looks at him and says, no, sir, it's a revolution. And, he just couldn't come to terms with this. Well, under duress then, on the 27th of June, Louis agreed to form a constitutional monarchy. I mean, this is a huge change for France. And he ordered that any separatist nobles and clergy join the National Assembly in writing a new constitution for France that would make them very similar to Britain and its constitutional monarchy. Monarchy where you have a legislature and a king, and we have a king who eventually would be second fiddle to the legislature. The legislature would be sovereign, therefore the people would be sovereign over the monarch. So revolutionary change. He said that the National Assembly could be united without these separate orders, and that they also could vote by head, meaning by population. And so now we have the third estate, 95% of the people who can really start expressing their voices through representatives. As an English observer quoted, "The whole business now seems over and the revolution complete." Keep in mind, this is June 27, 1789. So as we see, for the revolution in France, it was not yet over. Well, Louis, though, he comes back with a vengeance. Go ahead.
I was going to ask you a question. Why do you think he ordered any and all separatists of the second and third part, second and first parties into the assembly?
Yeah. He saw the writing on the wall. He didn't want to do it, as we can see by what he would then do in July. He didn't want to do it, but he knew that there was just this enormous popular pressure and that he almost couldn't help but doing it, or else the people would just run him out of town. And so really to try to save his skin, he capitulated. And then, though, he said, wait a minute, I'm the king. I need to assert myself again. And so he keeps flip-flopping. And so by July 1st, right, in desperation, he ordered 20,000 troops to bring the revolution to an end by force. He begins massing the troops at Versailles to arrest the representatives to the National Assembly. And now you might add, go ahead. Was someone saying something? No question?
No.
Oh, okay. Okay, sorry about that. Anyway, so the Assembly, though, didn't have an army at its disposal, right? I mean, think almost like, think of the American case where you basically have volunteers. You have the Articles of Confederation and the government under it just basically pleading for troops, requesting, but they can't make sure that it happens. Well, the people of France, though, they rise up in the city and the country with great effect, and it's very interesting to see the part that the people play in this phase of the revolution, because this marks a transition, if you will. We have an urban revolution and an agrarian revolution. In July, Paris and other cities in France erupted into revolution. This is where we have sort of the famous prison, the Bastille prison in Paris, which is long a symbol of royal tyranny. It's stormed, captured, and its demolishment has begun. Brick by brick, they gave jobs to the urban poor to actually start tearing it down brick by brick. On this date, the 14th of July, 1789, which is a date still celebrated in France as a national holiday. So if we think about this then, what events from the American Revolution relate to this urban revolution in Paris and this storming of the Bastille? Anything come to mind?
Yeah, July is a bad month for tyrants.
It is, definitely. Any specific events?
I think about the battles of Lexington and Concord and just everything that happened in Boston.
Yeah, thanks for that. Well, if we look at this picture, because this will compare to one I'll show you on the next slide, here we have a symbol of royal tyranny, the tyranny of a king. And we have the people trying to pull it down, literally as well as figuratively. Here's the storming of the Bastille. And now, what about this event? The destruction of George III's statue in New York City, the 9th of July, 1776. What are the parallels?
They're pulling something down.
Mm-hmm. And what are they pulling down?
They're
What
pulling down tyranny.
The symbol of power.
Yeah, excellent, right? The symbol of power. And it's so interesting because in France, right, we have the poor given jobs, okay, to try to alleviate their condition, and given jobs to pull down this prison brick by brick. Well, interestingly enough, with this statue, it would be shipped to Connecticut and then broken down and made into
Musket balls.
musket balls, right? Okay, excellent. So here, right, we can see that they're taking the symbols of tyranny and they're using them to advance the cause of the respective revolutions. So there's a similarity. There's also an Agrarian Revolution, and this is a very interesting phase of the French Revolution. In July and August of 1789, peasants attacked and pillaged the houses of their feudal lords. In an effort to end the feudal system in France, they burnt records of their feudal obligations, and so, if there weren't any records saying that, you needed to work for this person or that you were tied to this land, well, then you were a free person. They refused to pay feudal taxes and dues to landowners, and they also seized common plots of land in this effort to just turn society upside down. Well, this, I think, will be an interesting relation, and I want you to think very deeply about it. How would you compare or contrast this Agrarian Revolution in France with what happened socially during the American Revolution?
The only thing that comes to my mind is their declaration that they deserve to own land, the right to private property.
Yeah, great. Definitely a manifestation that's similar to this. What else?
In terms of attacking or pillaging property, things like throwing the tea in the harbor, but also didn't you tell me that in your studies about that specific city that you researched that people who supported the king, didn't you tell me that they were persecuted?
Mm-hmm.
That their property was taken from them?
Yeah, so property taken, we have property destroyed, et cetera, et cetera. So definitely another good similarity, Wendy. Thanks for remembering that. Well, it's interesting because a historian of the American Revolution, Gordon Wood, he had some interesting quotes here. He said, the American Revolution does not seem to have the same kinds of causes, the social wrongs, the class conflict, the impoverishment, the grossly inequitable distributions of wealth that presumably lie behind other revolutions. There were no peasant uprisings, no jacquerie, these bloody peasant revolts, no burning of chateaux, no storming of prisons, like in the French Revolution. But if we measure the radicalism by the amount of social change that actually took place, by the transformations in the relationships that bound people to each other, then the American Revolution was not conservative at all. On the contrary, it was as radical and revolutionary as any in history. Of course, the American Revolution was very different from other revolutions, but it was no less radical and no less social for being different. In fact, it was one of the greatest revolutions the world has known, a momentous upheaval that not only fundamentally altered the character of American society, but decisively affected the course of subsequent history. Most important, it made the interest and prosperity of ordinary people their pursuits of happiness, the goal of society and government. It would discover its greatness by creating a prosperous, free society belonging to obscure people with their workaday concerns and their pecuniary pursuits of happiness, common people with their common interests. And so, if we look then and relate what's going on here, because, as Gordon Wood said, and as we've sort of brought up, there wasn't sort of the same amount of, this massive agrarian revolt with, feudal relationships that were then overthrown, et cetera, but yet society certainly did change in so many wonderful ways that would help ordinary people like you and me. And so let's relate this then to Doctrine and Covenants 134, 1 through 2. Who would like to read these verses for us?
I'll read them.
Thank you.
Okay. We believe that governments were instituted of God for the benefit of man, and that he holds men accountable for their acts in relation to them, both in making laws and administering them, for the good and safety of society. We believe that no government can exist in peace except such laws are framed and held inviolate as will secure to each individual the free exercise of conscience, the right and control of property, and the protection of life.
Excellent. So what does this have to do with what we're talking about, this social change?
Well, it's talking about securing to each individual the right and control of property.
Hmm?
And definitely under the Agrarian Revolt, they didn't have that ability, and in the American Revolution, that was something that they demanded.
Yeah, definitely, right? That to protect these natural rights, the cause of revolution. Excellent. What else do we see here?
Well, we believe, that first sentence, we believe that governments were instituted by God for the benefit of man. They provide a framework in which we can live, in society and exercise our maximum freedoms without infringing upon the rights of others. So governments are good in that sense.
Excellent, right? We think about the whole purpose of the social contract, in the beginning, and, government coming from God, for the benefit of man. There wouldn't be a need to enter into it if we didn't need to protect natural rights, and so, that's government's only purpose in sort of this Lockean sense of why we have government, to protect these natural rights. And so when the government starts to take those away, of course we see the people in America, in France, saying, hey, let's do something about it. So you really can understand these revolutions in their context to natural rights. Well, let's then talk about just a couple conclusions in our last couple minutes here. How different was the first phase of the French Revolution from the American Revolution? What are your explanations?
I don't think it was very different at all. I think they were, for the most part, the same in the first phases.
Yeah. Thanks for that, Walter. Any other comments on that one?
Why do you say that, Walter? Why do you think they were the same?
Well, they both had the good ideas. They both were striving for freedom and throw off tyranny. But I think the American Revolution just later they just had different people that were able to kind of change that from becoming chaos to getting the Constitution written and ratified, and that was kind of, I think, one of the big things that kept it from becoming like the French Revolution.
Yeah, excellent, Walter. That's a great answer. The French could never achieve that stability that Americans, through God's hand, were able to achieve. And that's just such a miracle of the American Revolution. As we look at this beginning stage, so certainly, as Walter was saying, there are a lot of similarities. And what principles do you think they both shared? If you just look at the first phases.
Well, it's interesting that the first phase of the French Revolution didn't really have any violence until the very end, and by then it was out of force in that you could look at it because the king was the one who called troops first, and we see that in the American Revolution as well, just as it says in the Declaration of Independence that at some point they felt that it really was time to throw off government, and they didn't even bring in violence until it was felt necessary. And you see the same sort of principles of they didn't feel like the government was protecting their rights. They decided to overthrow it in order to create a government that would help them have those rights. All those ideas are there. And it's probably, once we move past this phase, that we'll start seeing a lot of more differences. But at the beginning, it seems like they just both wanted the same sort of freedoms and rights. And they went about it in the same way in a lot of instances.
Yeah, excellent, right? And if we look then at, the application of these principles that, you talked about, Christina, we see if you compare the American Revolution to this phase of the French Revolution, we're looking at constitutional phases, right, of revolution, right, trying to change things through the rule of law. And, what a great way to try to do it. And so it's interesting because this is definitely the most successful phase of the French Revolution. As they're trying to do it according to these correct principles of creating a constitution that will ensure rights for people. They're trying to do things through the proper channels rather than what would happen during the radical phases of either on the one side you have the terror and the executions that plagued the country, and on the other side you have Napoleon and then the tyranny that would plague the country under his dictatorship. And so, at this stage, though, we don't have either of those yet. We're starting to head there as we look at the popular uprisings of the people and that passion that could then go out of control. But at this stage, as Christina pointed out, it was a reaction to 20,000 troops sent to attack, right, this constitutional achievement of the French National Assembly. And so certainly lots of similarities there. Of course, differences too. But
the revolution kind of did start with King George sending those troops. I mean, the taxes and everything, that was a nuisance, and that got everybody all upset. But it didn't really begin until those troops came out and tried to confiscate the arms. That was it. That was the last straw.
Excellent. That's such a great point, Lori, because really, Lexington and Concord, that was the last straw. That was where people were on the fence. They jumped off that fence and headed for a gun, because they really felt that wow, okay, now we really see tyranny in its true forms. This isn't just perceived tyranny. This isn't just taxation without representation. I mean, this is a big deal that we can't settle within the empire anymore. It needs to be settled without the empire. Revolution, separation, and independence. Well, thanks so much for your great reasoning and relating. I look forward to our class on Wednesday. And thanks again just for being such a great class. And I'll see everybody later.
Okay, bye.
Thank you.
Okay, take care. Bye. Bye.
Bye.